tonight, we can sleep it all off tomorrow. Come on, keep it all together.
So this has been a strange year for movies, obviously. As you guys probably know by now, I prefer to go to the movie theater to enjoy my fair share of movies. But the movie theater was closed most of the year, so it made it a lot harder for me personally to catch all of the movies that came out this year. I personally just absolutely hate having to pay for movies on demand or VOD releases or whatever you want to say. And I just, even if they're free on Netflix or Amazon Prime, I just don't like watching movies at home as much as I do in the theater, especially when some of these movies had such a high price point to rent them on demand that I just wasn't willing to pay for it. And there even were a lot of movies, as I mentioned, that were released to streaming services that I subscribed to that I just never got around to seeing. So inevitably, when I was putting my top 10 movies of the year list together, it didn't look that great. I mean, I was able to come up with a top 10, but the bottom 5, I could not, with a clear conscience, list them in a top films of the year list. And I mean, I did see some great movies this year, and I'm pretty confident about my top 5. I feel like I have a relatively strong top 5 that I actually am comfortable with. But because the bottom 5 I didn't feel that confident in, I decided to limit this to a top 5 films of the year, top 5 films of 2020 list, instead of doing a top 10 like I normally would do. And like I did last year on my podcast, Midnight at the Movies. This is my first YouTube top films of the year list, but I'm still going to list the bottom 5 as honorable mentions. And at the very end of this video, I will also list off a bunch of the movies that got high praise this year that I just didn't have time to go see. So if throughout this list you're thinking, man, why has he not talked about this film or that film yet? It's probably because I didn't see it. I did not see as many movies as I did last year, and some of that is my fault, and some of that is because of the reasons I already talked about. But there, like I said, there was still some good stuff out there. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and list my honorable mentions of the year, which, as I mentioned, is basically my bottom 5, but I just couldn't live with myself if I put them on a top 10 list. But basically, they are my bottom 5 of my top 10, but whatever. You can also follow me on Letterboxd, link down below, if you want to keep up with what films I have seen and what films I will see in the future, which I'm going to have to refer to for this list, actually. So first up for my honorable mentions is Gretel and Hansel. I actually liked this movie. I thought it was okay. Next up is Synchronic, which, although I had a lot of problems with this movie, I thought it still had some pretty cool stuff in there, but not quite enough for me to feel okay with it. Next up, we have Birds of Prey, that Harley Quinn movie that came out, which really surprised me. I actually did not think I was going to like that movie at all, but it was actually a pretty fun movie, and it was on sale on Black Friday, so I bought it, but whatever. Next up, we have Underwater, another movie that really surprised me that was released in January, but filmed, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, it surprised me as well. And then my last honorable mention is The Invisible Man, which almost made the top 5, but not quite. So those are the honorable mentions. So now we can get started with the big guns. My top 5 movies of 2020. And these movies I'll talk a lot more in depth about than I just did my honorable mentions, of course. But coming in at number 5 is The Rental, directed by Dave Franco. It is actually Dave Franco's directorial debut, and I really like this movie. I know there are some people out there that didn't like it, but I thought it was a really great mix of a psychological thriller with some slasher stuff in there as well. I thought it really worked for me. They set up a lot of this sort of emotional stuff or tension between the couples that are on this trip. And I don't know, it took me on a ride that I feel like ultimately paid off. You know, it set all these things up that had nothing to do with the slasher element, but it still sprinkled a little bit of that in there. And then it all kind of came together at the very end for what I felt like was a really interesting and fun climax / resolution ending to the movie. Now, coming in at number 4 is The Lodge, directed by Veronica Franz and Severin Fiala. I think that's how you pronounce their names. I'm not completely sure. I think they're Norwegian or Scandinavian. Please forgive me if I'm wrong on that, because I probably am. But this movie was great. I had a lot of fun with The Lodge. Okay, I shouldn't say fun because it is a very devastating and horrific and depressing movie, but it hits those elements so well that I enjoyed it because I love a good dark movie. I'm kind of I can be cynical, you know. If you're into dark movies, dark horror, I think you'll really love it. I mean, this movie right off the bat, it lets you know that it's not playing around. I'm not going to give anything away, but it really shocked me. The only reason it's kind of lower on my top 5 list is because on a rewatch, the twist is not as great as I wish it could have been. I mean, there's several different directions the movie could have gone. And the direction that they decided to go, that the filmmakers decided to go, I felt like could have been done better. But overall, I cannot complain too much about this movie. Now, coming in at number 3 is Sound of Metal. Now, this movie was released last month in December on Amazon Prime, and I think it was released earlier in the year during some festivals or something, but it is currently available on Amazon Prime as of the recording of this video. So, I highly, highly recommend this movie. This movie blew me away. This movie was nothing like I thought it was going to be. I was going into this expecting it to be some sort of Whiplash type movie about music, and it kind of is, but not really. But what it does end up being about, and if you watch the trailer, it kind of shows you what it's about, but it is great. Like, this performance by, what's his name? Riz Ahmed, who is also in Nightcrawler. This has to be one of my favorite performances. Actually, I think I can confidently say that this is my favorite performance of the year. I mean, it's about this dude who loses his hearing, and he's a musician. And the emotions that he is able to portray in this movie feels extremely realistic. I think he did an incredible job of portraying, and I should say conveying, these very subtle emotions throughout the movie that I don't think I've seen anything like it this year as far as an actor's performance. And for a majority of this movie, he plays opposite of Paul Risi, I think that's how you say his name, who is also amazing. That has to probably be my second performance of the year. And I think I forgot to say, this movie, Sound of Metal, is directed by Darius Martyr. And man, I could go on and on about this movie, but I'm going to try to keep it a little bit short. But you gotta go see this. So moving on to number 2 of my top 5 movies of 2020 is Tenet, directed by Christopher Nolan, of course. Now, did this movie have some problems? Yeah, it had quite a few issues, especially with the sound design and the sound mixing, and there were lots of parts where you couldn't really hear the dialogue that well, but I love this movie so much. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan, and although I'm a big fan, I'm still going to be honest if this movie is trash, and I don't think Tenet was trash. It gave me exactly what I wanted. It gave me this really interesting and complex sort of spy espionage movie that really intrigued me and kept me thinking about it long after the movie was over. And I had to put it up there. But now, drum roll please. Although I don't think I'm going to actually add a drum roll in here. Number 1 of my top 5 films of 2020 is Possessor, directed by that one dude's son. What's his name? Hold on. How am I forgetting this already? Brandon Cronenberg. How did I forget that? This movie blew me away. It was definitely my favorite of the year. There was nothing else like it that I've seen in a long time. And I don't want to sit here and compare him to his father, but he has a lot of body horror elements in there that kind of reminds me of his father. And it was great. The movie is awesome. It's very bloody. If you guys all know, I love bloody movies. It's great, man. I don't know what to say about it. It is such an interesting concept that I'm still thinking about. I had to get this movie on 4K, the uncut version, and I love it. But that's going to wrap up my top 5 films of 2020. But real quick, like I said in the beginning, I want to give a quick mention to all the films that I've heard high praise about, but just didn't get around to seeing them yet. So right now, I'll play those. So if you loved one of those films and wondered why it wasn't on my list, it's because I haven't seen it yet. But let me know down below in the comments what your favorite movies of 2020 were. Let me know if there's anything I missed, anything that I haven't seen that I need to see. And yeah, thank you guys as always for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Oh, and also go check out my late night live streaming videos. Playlist linked down below. Peace out, guys.